So welcome. Just before we get going, just wanted to acknowledge the Yagumbe people, and they're the traditional custodians of the land we're on at the moment. And also note their own open and generous sharing of their culture that we saw yesterday for those of you who were here at the Welcome to Country. That was really cool. Thanks to all our speakers who will be speaking today, and thank you to all of you for turning up. Some of you will hopefully be here all day, some of you will be popping in and out, that's totally cool. And if you've come specifically for today, thank you, particularly to you guys. The hashtag for today, well, not for today, for the conference is LCA 2020. So if you're sharing your experience on social media, make sure you use that. The most important thing for you to remember today, please make sure you come back on time after the lunch and afternoon tea breaks. It may be deceptive how long it's going to take you to get back after lunch, so please be aware of the time. Pia Andrews is going to be joining us via Zoom today, so if you were excited that she was going to be talking, just be excited, but just be aware that she's going to be Zooming in. She won't be here in physical form. What else did I have to say? Oh, yeah. All of our speakers today are women, so that's really cool. So we just wanted to make you aware of that. Okay, so our first speaker is Sara King. She's an e-research analyst with Australia's academic and research network provider AARNet. She's also, I believe, an archivist in a previous life.
Previous life, yeah.
She's got extensive experience in engagement and training with expertise in research data technologies in humanities and social science, HASS. And she was part of the Tinker Virtual Lab, which used to be called HASS Devil, but then they decided that was a scary name. And she's going to tell us all about what she does at AARNet and how they support GLAM. So please make Sara welcome.
Thanks, everyone. So here I am. My name's Sara, and I work at AARNet. A lot of people haven't heard of AARNet before, so I will go through just a little bit about what that's about. But just to give you a background about me, I come from a background in research and various roles in libraries and archives. I'm a little bit nervous talking at a tech conference. I'm very new to this world, so forgive me if I'm a little shaky. But I spent nearly a decade at the National Archives of Australia before moving out into this world. And I guess I heard an expression a little while ago that was tech curious, and I think that kind of describes me. So I don't have a technological background, but I've found myself in this world because I'm really excited about it. So after National Archives and a bunch of different roles, which I really loved, I went to work for the HASS Devil, which sounded pretty interesting and exciting, and it was, and I had a really good time with that. Unfortunately, that's just now finished off, but that was the Humanities, Arts and Social Sciences Data Enhanced Virtual Lab, and it was about trying to pull together some tools and some methods for humanities, arts and social sciences researchers into a particular space online to kind of break down some barriers. And I think that's really the philosophy of what I'm doing in my work, is breaking down barriers. I see myself as a kind of translator or a communicator, and I want to join up these wonderful technologies with people who maybe don't see themselves as tech people. So I want to be that glue in the middle. So I'm focused at AARNet on, I'm just going to have to figure out how to see my notes, sorry. So I'm focused on HASS and GLAM outreach from the AARNet position. And I think that's going to be really exciting coming into the future, because I think there's a lot of activity around in this area, but it's not a traditional area for AARNet, so it's brand new for us in some senses, what we're doing. But there is actually quite a long backbone of support for GLAM, so I'm going to talk about what we've been doing in terms of that. They talk a lot about the pipes at AARNet, which is the actual physical network. So that's our main business, is connecting up institutions. So there's a bit of that around that has kind of incidentally, I guess, supported all of these research areas. Okay, so what we're going to be talking about today, a little bit of AARNet and who we are, and then I'll go through what we do with GLAM, and then specifically talk about training methods and resources, which is really my one of the focus areas that I have, is trying to communicate out some of this technology and how to use it to non-technical people. And then if I'm feeling brave enough, we'll do a bit of a demo. Live demo. So we get given a sort of stack of slides as part of this is what you do when you do a presentation with AARNet. And I've seen this slide a lot, and I never really twigged until I went to a different conference where someone used this. That is actually the fibre. So that, I just thought, oh, that's pretty lights. So that's the kind of my connection with the world. I think talking about the priming and stuff from the thing this morning, I was like, yeah, this is so true, because your expertise is so important. So a lot of us would look at that and go, oh, nice lights. But at AARNet, that's actually the pipes. That's what we do. So we put together all of these beautiful glass cable things, and off they go, and they make the internet and all that. So AARNet stands for Australia's Academic Research Network. It's a non-profit organisation that is supported by all of the universities, most research institutions, now lots of hospitals, schools, and GLAM. They're all our members, and we put them together using this great network. It's super fast, very efficient, very, very cool. Apparently it's what the NBN would love to be, but it's never going to happen. So that network is huge, and it is really important in terms of providing a very, very high quality, dependable service for research. But we know in GLAM that researchers are also wanting to have contact with the institutions that hold a lot of the GLAM data. So my interest is in how the researchers and the universities connect up with the GLAM institutions. So yeah, there's a lot of talk about plumbing, pipes, engineers, people who go around digging holes. I work in that company, but that's definitely not my expertise. I'm perfectly happy at the end of the talk to put you in contact with people who know all of those things, though. But one of the most interesting things that come about in the time that I've been in AARNet, which is just a few months, is something called the Indigo cable. I'm not sure if you guys have heard of that, but basically they have laid these huge cables between Sydney and Perth under the sea, and then from Perth to Singapore. So now Australia has a network that can achieve 49.8 gigabits per second sustained throughput between Australia and Europe for research data transfers. So they've tested that, and we can get Sydney to London at about 50 gigabits per second. So that's the kind of network that we're talking about, if you guys understand gigabits per second, which I didn't until not long ago. So what we put out into the world is this high-speed network for universities. We have a cloud environment called Cloudstore, which I'll go into a little bit more. That's AARNet developed and supported service. And that is for all of our customers and the wider community. And basically what it is sync, share, and store service. But within that, we've got a whole lot of other options, like Only Office, which is that only open source Office suite. So basically, I knew about Google stuff, you know, collaborative editing and all of that. Well, this is the non-Google version of that, if you're interested in it. And we've also got Jupyter Lab for Jupyter Notebooks. We provide Zoom. If any of you have used video conferencing before, that is most likely going through AARNet. And we also provide specialist data movement solutions and expertise, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But if you have enormous amounts of data, there are other ways to get around moving it around, and we've got some experts who can help you with that. So hopefully you're all a little GLAM sensitive, and you'll appreciate my historic photos as we go through the slides. I do have the references for them, but that's a reading room in Port Adelaide. So what we're doing at the moment for GLAM in AARNet is quite diverse, and we'll go through a few of the different projects that we're working on. But one of the first things I thought I didn't know, and I found out because of this slide, our GLAM members are as follows, which is, I think, a fairly broad and good representation of a lot of GLAM institutions in Australia. So they're currently on our network, except maybe NAA. I think there might be some changes going on then. So if you work, does anyone here work for any of those organisations? No, all right. Well, if you work with anyone who does, they may not even realise that they're on AARNet, because I worked for National Archives for 10 years and I had no idea. It's just called the internet, right? Yeah. So what it means, though, is that they have access to some pretty great kit, and they probably don't know about it. And so I think one of the things that my job is to do is to go around and talk to people about what they've got and how they can access it. So, for example, I would have asked you, do you know about AARNet, and do you use Cloudstore, and can you tell me anything about your experience if you'd worked there? But none of you do, so we won't do that. But yeah, that's kind of the relationships, I suppose, that we have. This is a picture of people fishing for trout, and that's Sydney University up the back. So in our projects, we're working with a range of different university libraries and other institutions. So for some digitisation and data curation projects, we've got a project ongoing. That's a 4-year project with ANU. Tinker has been part of the AARNet landscape for a couple of years, and I'll talk about that. We're working with a group called GLAMx at Uni of Newcastle. Then there's the GLAM Labs network, which is very new in Australia. I'll talk a little bit about that. In terms of digital preservations, there's a group called AusPreserves coming out of Uni of Melbourne, and we're on board with them. There's some really interesting stuff going on in video game preservation, and AARNet's joined a couple of projects there, as well as some digital preservation ideas coming out of Uni of Sydney. Anyone remember those card files? That's how we used to do things, isn't it? So, digitisation and data curation. This is a big deal in GLAM. I think digitisation, people have been furiously digitising for years and years and years and years and found out they're never going to get anywhere. It's still going to take 700 years to get it done. Data curation, I am pretty sure that anyone doing HASS, I mean, anyone working with data actually spends probably, I think there's studies 60 to 80% of their time just wrangling the data. So you've got really, really accomplished, very creative researchers who should be working on actual questions and projects, who spend a lot of time in the depths of working in data curation. So we're working on some projects to try and speed that up and try and create some workflows and try and just get that all a little bit more sorted for people. So one of the projects that we're doing is called the Sydney Stock Exchange Project, and that's us with the University of, the Australian National University. They have a huge pile of Sydney Stock Exchange and share lists, about 50 years worth of stuff. They're pages hand filled in, if you can see there, that's an example of one of the pages, morning and night of the Sydney Stock Exchange for 50 years. They're in the process of digitising and trying to make that incredible resource available to people, but it's a complicated digitisation process, right? Because you've got structured data in there, but you've also got handwriting. It's also a really large amount of stuff. So it's 199 large format bound volumes of pages that were posted up, 3 times a day to show those stock prices. So pre-printed sheets. It's 70,000 high-res pages of digitised material now. They had a lot of problems trying to figure out how to use OCR on that, so we're part of that project. It's really difficult to do OCR on structured data, as stupid as that sounds. I don't like the lines, the computers don't understand the little dots and so on. So we've been working with a few different people and trying to figure out how to do that. And they've been using Cloudstore to store all those huge amounts of pages on. But this corpus, if we can get this corpus construction to meet the needs of researchers, that kind of data could be really transformational for a lot of research that people want to do in a whole range of different areas. So in economics, history, political science, social science, and so on. So what we are intending to do is to collaborate so that this be an exemplar for other university libraries and other libraries who are working with similar things to automate and come up with an efficient digitisation pipeline or process using Cloudstore and our AARNet infrastructure. So I know for sure, because I used to do it in my old job, if you digitised a bunch of stuff, you couldn't put it over a certain amount of bytes, I guess, because of a whole range of different problems. So often we'd just be sending hard drives around, right? That's your national collections. People spend a lot of time, a lot of money doing those things, and they're just posting them around the country. So we're working on data transfer and trying to understand, and not only understand, but help other people understand how to use better data movement operations. So using things like our own cloud, the Sync. A lot of people don't know about syncing and also sharing via the cloud, and also something called WebDAV, which a lot of people don't know about, but it can be really useful. So we're about 2 years in on this project. They've been using Transcribus, if any of you have heard of that, which is a tool for transcribing handwriting. You can train it to understand the handwriting in your collection, so that's been an interesting process, and there's a lot of documentation and analysis using Jupyter Notebooks, and there's a pretty well-known, he calls himself a hacker historian called Tim Sherratt. If you're interested, I would look him up because he's using Jupyter Notebooks in all kinds of different ways to tap into different collections, and he's using his notebooks to help this project. And one of the ways he's done that is he's got a, and hopefully I'll be able to go through it afterwards, he's done a notebook that has figured out all of the public holidays in that first part of the century that these the stock exchange papers work on, because one of the problems with the checking of the data is that there are public holidays that create anomalies in each of the pages, and so he's figured out how to apply, and because kings died and things like that in that period, all of the public holidays like Queen's birthday, King's birthday, it's all changed. So he's managed to use a notebook to feed into that. But something like that, I mean, that's just for New South Wales. But if you've got now access to that in your collections in New South Wales, then you can just apply that over the top to different things and you can use that. So we're creating the kind of data that will hopefully be useful for other projects. Now, Tinker. Tinker is the fancy brand name for the HASS Devil, and this is a project that went on for a couple of years. We're experimenting on different things, and things like transcription and data analysis, text analysis and geomapping. And what AARNet was doing as part of that was creating a data curation framework that would be accessible to HASS and GLAM workers, so people who are not necessarily technically engaged or trained, but they could come up with some collective terms and some knowledge that would be shareable amongst a whole range of different people. So we have created a data curation framework. If you go to the Tinker site, you'll be able to see that on there, and that's a kind of easy to read version of perhaps some of the more technical manuals that might be out there, and just to help people to understand a sort of a conceptual model of how different tools and standard systems, processes and so on can improve data curation so that people are spending less time wrangling dirty data and just being able to get clear language around it and helping people to do that. So that's one of our other contributions. Something pretty exciting that has happened with the National Film and Sound Archives is our enterprise team designed and implemented a data centre grade network in their offices between ACT and Sydney and upgraded that connection to 10G. So they're running a high-speed VPN between Sydney and ACT, and we've assisted in the design and implementation of that to help them reach their aims, because they were a similar kind of institution where they were just mailing hard drives around of all this stuff. So we did a pilot with them to create that mini network for them using Cloudstore again so that they could store all this stuff. So both digitised and born digital material could be all transferred and used via network and cloud and take that physical kind of sneaker net part of the system out. And one of the things that I'm doing with them is also we're going to put on a training session for their staff, and it'll expand out to Canberra staff, on how to use some of the basic network stuff and Jupyter Notebooks. So if you know anyone who is in a cultural institution in Canberra who wants to kind of get a little bit more technical, then let me know. Now, I mentioned before the GLAM Labs. So GLAM Labs, it comes out of what was called the Library Lab at the British Library. So a way of getting people to use digitised and digital collections in creative ways. It's about drawing people together through digital collections. So out of that, there is now a global network. And in Australia, we have 3 GLAM Labs. There's one out of the University of Newcastle, which is that GLAMX. The DX Lab is the State Library of New South Wales, and in Adelaide we have the North Terrace Cultural Precinct Innovation Lab, which is actually a combination of the Art Gallery, the library, the History Trust, and I think another one that I've forgotten. Anyway, and they're working together to combine and join up digital collections for people to be able to use them in more creative and different ways. So we're supporting this community as it comes out and develops. Over the European summer, I think it was in June or July, a group of all of different people from around the world went to Qatar to do a book sprint, and they wrote this book there, Open a GLAM Lab, which is available online. I can send you the link if you like. For anyone working in an institution that wants to apply some of these digital tools and methods to their work, then that's a really great way in. And it's free online, it's from people who are experienced, and it's pretty exciting. So we're hoping to be involved in an event in October 2020 about connecting this up and helping other people start labs in Australia. So for digital preservation, I mean, this isn't new. I think anyone who's worked in any collections in the last 20 years would have seen little mini discs come in, VHS, a whole range of different magnetic carriers. This has become a bit of an emergency for collecting institutions. We've got a deadline of 2025, basically, to preserve anything stored on magnetic media. And then, of course, there's the opposite, or not opposite, there's just a continuing problem of anything born digital, and how do we preserve it? How do we make sure that what we've made now is going to be usable in 20 years' time? It's especially around software and just getting people to understand that certain things aren't going to last forever, and digital is definitely one of those. So there is an urgency to preserve, but it seems to be also a lot of stagnation in this area. A lot of people don't understand the urgency. So there is a group that started in 2018 called Australia Preserves. If you're interested, I would definitely hit them up, because I think it's a really valuable and interesting group. It's just a collective. There's no real institution behind it necessarily. It's just come out of people working in these areas, understanding the urgency and feeling quite isolated and not knowing what to do in their particular roles. So you can pop onto that link there. That really just started out of an event in Melbourne, but they had, I think, 75 attendees for the first event with 50 people on a waiting list. So there's clearly an interest and a need for people to get support working in digital preservation. So AARNet is now involved in that. It's all kinds of different organisations, lots of different drivers, but essentially the problems are the same, and so it's about trying to connect people up so that they can build a bit of momentum behind, I guess, trying to convince certain elements of their institutions. I would say the executive probably is the main problem, to put some money into trying to preserve some of these really important documents of our national heritage, I suppose. So Jay Weatherburn is the main contact. She's Program Manager of Digital Preservation at Uni of Melbourne. They've partnered with something called the Digital Preservation Coalition, and I'll talk about that in a little minute. One of the other things that we're working on is something about video game preservation and emulation. I'm guessing there might be a few people in here who are into video games. So we are also considering this as a priority. So the ACME and the Museum of Applied Sciences and the NFSA are all working together to collect and preserve particularly Australian titles, and emulation is one of those strategies, so we're involved in a project with them. This example here is from the Internet Archive. It's a Commodore 64 game emulated on the multiple arcade machine emulator. So if you're interested in old video games, you can actually go to the Internet Archive, and there's a few around. There's also a project called Play It Again, and that's a project with Swinburne Uni and ACME, and we're working with them as well to support the emulation as a service concept using cloud to access preserved software and digital assets. So that's another thing that AARNet's getting involved in. And this is just a little bit of information about that Digital Preservation Coalition. There are a lot of organisations around the world. It comes out of England, but now the National Archives of Australia, the University of Melbourne and AARNet are the Australian members, and I believe they're going to be opening an office in Australia soon. So they're helping organisations to get value from their digital assets, raising awareness of those issues, you know, cultural, strategic, all of those problems around digital preservation. And the end goal being about building this big capacity in a workforce so that we actually have people who know how to do it, that there's also good practice and good governance behind that. So have a look at the DCP. So let's have a look at Cloudstore. That image is me thinking that wool looks a bit fluffy like clouds and it's in a wool store. Does that help? So AARNet, this is our kind of file, sync, share, storage service, and all universities, anyone who works in a university will have access to this. Doesn't matter if you're a researcher or if you're professional staff, and people who work in those institutions before. So what it is basically is AARNet as the data connector. So we're connecting up all of these different groups through that the Cloudstore. I don't even know how to explain it, but so we've got the user who can connect with HPC, but the data can still go through Cloudstore. There's all of the other clouds over there, research storage, institution repositories, domain repositories. So this is where GLAM ends up, right? So it's all part of this great big network. But the trick is with AARNet too is that then is connected internationally. So you can work with anyone around the world using these services. So it's basically about an ecosystem of different parts of the research landscape and connecting everyone up together. So seeing Cloudstore as the main way to move your data around. This is the way that Cloudstore is kind of illustrated, I guess, if you like, if you want to see it. It's how the whole thing hangs together, with the core part being research data lifecycle, because we're the network for universities. That's our principal role. So we're thinking about it in terms of how people do research. So you would start with your data collection, data analysis, publishing, or you'd start with a proposal, and then go around. So enveloping everything is file sender. So if you have access to Cloudstore, you can send up to, I think, is it 20 terabytes from someone to someone else. And they can also, you can give them vouchers and they can send that stuff to you. So if you're working with anyone within an institution that's on AARNet or in the university, you can use this system, and it's very quick. It's good. Only Office I talked about before, so that's that open source documents and spreadsheets and all that sort of stuff. Rocket, WebDAV and Sync are those tools that you would use when you need to start thinking about moving around big bits of data, so anything that you can't sort of drop and drag. And that's probably where I need to start thinking about where to do a bit more training. And then on the left is just some things that are kind of more for specialists. So we've got audio, 3D, things like that. So if you're working with linguists, for example, who use a huge amount of audio, or archaeologists that like to use 3D material and so on. And something called Swan, and I'll talk about Swan in a sec. So for anyone who's used cloud before, we've tried to make it pretty accessible to everyone, so it looks kind of like a lot of other ways of doing cloud. So you just see your files in a big list, but you can organise them a bit with what's been shared with you or what you've shared out. You can have favourites and so on. And then you can add things, move things around, all of those sorts of normal basic things. But up the top, you can see there are a few different options for specialist things. So that's the file sender, Swan, and collections. Collections is about packaging data. So if you need to publish data, for example, that's a way of pushing it all in together. So it's a kind of integral thing that can't be messed with, I suppose, if you need to move it around for publications and so on. And that's quite a useful thing for GLAM, I believe. Okay, so the Carpentries, we're going to change tack a little bit. So I said before that my main role is really about talking to people and communicating and trying to get this bridge across from the technology to people. One of the ways we've decided to do that is through something called the Carpentries. Carpentries is a global network of volunteers who train in foundational coding and data science skills to researchers. That researchers thing, I think, is starting to expand out. So like me, I'm starting to look at people who work in the GLAM areas. They're not necessarily researchers, but they're working with data. That may end up being research data. So it's all part of a system. The digital preservation people are also using Carpentries to start teaching some of their things. So basically what it is just a way of running workshops that is a little different perhaps than some traditional ways of teaching technology. I know in my experience, a lot of people I know have had quite indifferent training experiences when learning about technology. You might lose your place. You don't know what the person's talking about. There's too much technical language. It just takes too much out of you to learn anything. So what they've done is they've slowed everything right down. And basically the way it works is that your workshop runs at the pace of the slowest learner. It's not about appeasing the people who are up the front and ready to go. What you do with them is they become peer teachers and you start to use the expertise of those in the room to help the ones out who are running behind. Well, it's not even running behind because they're running the speed, right? They're the ones who are in charge. And really what it's about as well in my world is starting off with a lot of jargon busting. So it's actually a lot of talking at the beginning. There's not a huge amount of techie kind of stuff, but it's using everyone's expertise, Googling stuff. Well, what is this? What's a kernel? What is it? You don't make any assumptions on what people know. When I heard kernel the first time, I thought, what has corn got to do with anything, right? So it's a little bit like the man was talking about before, what you rely on, what you know. So I'm talking to people who have no computer or technical background. We need to talk about language first. So it's a lot of that kind of material. So the carpentry pedagogy also very much hangs off of a code of conduct. And literally there is stuff in there about no tech shaming. I had never heard of that concept before, but it can happen that people will have a go at you for whatever hardware you've brought with you. If you're a Mac person, if you're a Linux person, whatever that is absolutely not allowed. And a whole range of other things need to be sorted out. So everyone has to read that code of conduct and behave themselves very well in the class, including the instructor. Potentially most importantly. It's about creating a positive learning environment. There are no stupid questions, and actually there are no do you have any questions, but the instructor is always asking what questions do you have. So it's always about creating a very open environment, and you need to be able to help people feel very comfortable in what they're learning. Formative assessment is a sort of tricky language around basically just checking that people know. Oh, wow, that's gone really fast. What you've taught them. So about every 5 or 10 minutes, you're checking up all the time. So it's not after the end of a 3-hour marathon, you say, hey, so how'd you go? It's about every 5 or 10 minutes, you're constantly checking people up with where you are. Lots of praise, a lot of talk about that expert blind spot, which was really interesting to me this morning, talking with the gentleman talking about the priming, because one of the reasons I think I'm in the role that I am in is that I don't have a technological background. And often what we're doing is we're just working it out as we go. We're very basic beginner level. And so I don't actually even have that expert blind spot to worry about. And the other thing that we do is live coding, and that's really important to watch, for people to watch you do the coding as they're doing it as well. So they're copying you. They can see when you make mistakes, and you always use mistakes as opportunities. So every time you get to a point where something's gone wrong, you're like, okay, so what can we learn? How does this help us? And it kind of reduces the sense of panic that a lot of people get when they're doing that sort of work. So what I've done for AARNet in terms of Carpentries is produce some train the trainer materials. The spirit of Carpentries is it's all open source, it's all free, it's accessible to anyone in the world, and it's all done in a certain format. I'm struggling with that format because we need to use GitHub, so I've had to go back. I have had to learn GitHub, and I still don't quite get it. So if you want any of these links, you can ask me, or I can get them to you somehow. What I've done is an introduction to Jupyter Notebooks, that is now in what they call the incubator lesson area in the Carpentries, so it's not accepted Carpentries curriculum, but I've pushed it into that format. And at the moment, it looks like the workshop goes for 40 hours or something, so it's not quite right. I've got to fix a few things. But I've also got PowerPoint with notes and Etherpad, which is another thing that is used in the Carpentries training. So I'm happy to share any of that with any of you. And we also do something called Network Know-How and Data Handling, which is just another Carpentry-style workshop, a lot of jargon busting, lots of little tiny tips and tricks about how to understand how data moves around and how quickly things can be or how slowly they can go and all that sort of stuff. So they're the two things that I'm working on, but I know there's a lot more and I have a lot more to do. So if any of you have any suggestions on the kind of things that could help make things easier for GLAM people working on networks and with data, then I'd love to know about it. And so, yeah, I was thinking I'd do a little mini Cloudstore demo, but I did do the static one just in case it didn't work, and I think I'm going to run out of time. So, but hop onto AARNet. You can see if you have access or not. I don't know where you all work. But, yeah, definitely come and talk to me during the break, or we can have questions now. But I'm really interested to know what you think. Thanks.
Thank you, Sara. That was awesome. So I'm not going to ask you if you have any questions. I'm going to ask you, what questions do you have? We are recording this session, so you will need to wait for the mic if you've got a question.
So I don't know how much of an issue this is in this space.